Okay, great. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Course Report webinar. My name is Liz Eggleston. I work on Course Report, which is a resource for finding the coding bootcamp that's right for you. So like I say at all of our webinars, if you haven't looked at Course Report yet, use our directory to find schools that fit your needs. Check out our blog for interviews with students and instructors and founders at boot camps across the world. We've also got application tips and a ton of other resources. So today's webinar is one that I've been looking forward to. So we're going to talk about iOS development, and more specifically, ever since Apple released their newest iOS programming language, Swift, I get questions all the time from future boot campers asking if they should be learning Objective-C or Swift. So today we're going to try to answer that question with the help of Steve Schauer, who has been an iOS developer for over 5 years. He's also a lead mentor at Bloc. And Steve really knows what he's talking about, so he's going to give us an overview of Objective-C and Swift, and he's going to try to answer all of your questions, so we're really excited to have him here. So I want to remind everyone that this is going to be a Q&A style webinar, so please use the questions tab to send in your questions, or you can tweet at Course Report. One other reminder is that we have a really great exclusive scholarship for everyone who's tuning in, so you can use the code Course Report in the referral section of your Bloc application, and you'll get $200 off your tuition to your next apprenticeship. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about discounts and scholarships after the webinar. So with that, let's get started. So I am going to share some of the slides that we've put together. And Steve, why don't you start by introducing yourself while I share my screen. Yeah.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Steve Schauer. I am the lead iOS mentor at Bloc.io, online boot camp. We have a number of tracks, including mobile development. As Liz mentioned, I've been an iOS developer for a while now and a software developer for a lot longer than that. Really having an awesome time at Bloc. It's so fun to see people come in and learn a trade and get a job and do all these amazing things. So we're really excited, and like Liz said, that's a question that we hear all the time as well, is should I learn Swift? Should I learn Objective-C? And so without going into an incredible amount of technical detail, we're gonna try to answer those questions today. So here's some of the things that we hear about why people are excited about Swift and why they think this is a great time to jump in and learn Swift. One of them is, the first one there is like, there are no developers with 5 years of experience with Swift. So if I start now, 5 years, I'll be one of those people with 5 years of experience. There's a lot to be said for that. People think back to when the iPhone was introduced. It was when the App Store opened, it was commonly referred to as a gold rush. You could just about get anything up there. And you know, if only if I would have started 5 years ago, that would have been awesome. But anyway, another thing that we hear all the time is it's just easier to understand than Objective-C or C. It has some really great new language features. And probably the biggest thing that I hear, it's simpler. And I don't necessarily agree with that part, but we'll take a look and we'll find out. You can make your own decision. So Objective-C has many decades of history behind it. It started in the 80s with Steve Jobs' company, Next Computer Company, was developed to be the development language for the Next Step operating system. And when he returned to Apple and OS X was developed, Objective-C was the development language for that. And we've been using it ever since. It's very well established. It's a dynamic language, has amazing third-party support because of the millions and millions of developers and users. Huge community of developers. You can ask a question, search for a question if you're having trouble with a development issue, and there's going to be so many answers, so many resources to go and find help on that. And then we have Swift. Amazing last year when that was announced. Like, unlike most of the Apple events where we kind of know, like the launch, bigger iPhones, this was just an absolute surprise for everybody. We have a brand new language, and these kind of things don't happen all that often. It's got a lot of safety features. One of the main design um, um, reasons for creating Swift was that there are a lot of common app crashing errors that happen in iOS apps, and Swift was specifically designed to prevent a lot of those common errors. It has type inference, which means that you can you don't have to type as much. Different kind of type. You can say something like this variable customer name equals Smith, and the compiler will figure out, well, that's a string, so I guess customer name is a string. You don't have to explicitly say it's a string before you can type a statement in like that. It has optionals, which are really powerful feature that prevents a lot of common errors. You get into a situation where a method might need to return a valid value that is like nothing or zero, like my bank account. Ask what the balance is. It's zero. But what happens if it really isn't zero? There was an error. The bank burned down, or there is no bank account. What are you going to do? Zero means something specific. So commonly in C, in an Objective-C, in that case, you'd return -1. That's a signal that didn't go correctly, so that you could reserve 0 to be a valid value. Well, Swift solves this by something called optionals, which they may exist and return a value, and they may not. Another feature is generics, and I'll show you an example of that in a bit, where you can use a template instead of a specific type. You can say that this is like any type and write your code to do multiple things depending on which type it's actually working with at the moment. And then the playground, which is very cool, which turns Swift into like a scripting language. You type code and you immediately see the results on screen. It's great for playing around. So let's look at some typical code, and like I say, I won't go into a lot of depth of this. I know some of you may be familiar with all of this, some of you may not. But this is a sample of some Objective-C code. We have a class called NSString, and the reason that it starts with NS is because that dates back to a prefix that stands for next step. And it's a pointer, so we have an asterisk, and we call it myStr. And we initialize it with this string, my name is, and we end it with a semicolon. And then if we want to append something to it, we have another line of code contained within square brackets, which is the syntax, and that method is called string by appending string. Objective-C is very wordy. You see these amazingly long method names, but the benefit, obviously, is that's pretty darn does. And we're going to pass it a parameter of just so happens to be my name there, and end it with a closing square bracket, and of course never forget the semicolon. Now in Swift, here's what we get the same result by typing in the keyword var for variable, or var, I don't know how you say that, my str equals my name is plus Steve Schauer. That's really clear. That's a clear win for Swift. And no semicolon. You can just think of all the time you're going to save in your life without having to type all those semicolons. And there's other parts where it's less apparent, the differences, you know, the big gain in readability or amount of letters you have to type. To initialize and declare an array, again, it starts with NS array, my array, and we pass it within these square brackets, these 3 items. So we're going to have an array of 3 items. The first one is Swift, second is array, third is dictionary. And in Swift, it looks very much the same, and even has square brackets around it. But once again, we don't have to type the semicolon. Now, the next example I wanted to show you, and this is some code that comes directly from one of our project examples. In a view controller, there's a method called viewDidLoad that kind of gets things, you're ready to go, but you have not yet appeared on screen, and so you can do your setup work there. So we're calling super view did load. That's our super class. Let it get a chance to do anything it wants to do. The next 4 lines are creating a scroll view and adding that as a subview to our main view. And we're setting its background color to white. The 3rd line down, it says UI color, white color. And then we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to add an image view. We're going to call the UI image view new, and then we're going to add that subview to our main view, to our scroll view, sorry. Now in Swift, unlike some of the earlier examples that we were looking at, it looks almost identical. Override and func, it's something that really kind of mystifies me why we couldn't have called that function, but func, called view did load, and it has a couple of closing trailing parentheses, which can contain a parameter. And then those 6 lines code are almost absolutely identical. And the reason that they are is that iOS itself is implemented through a series of frameworks, a collection of frameworks like UIKit, core location, you know, there's core animation, and those are all written in Objective-C. So when we're working in Swift and when we're working in the real world, a huge amount of our code involves stringing together and manipulating a series of calls into the Objective-C frameworks. And so that's why this is only, at this point and in this type of code, Swift is really only superficially different than Objective-C. You don't have to remember to type a semicolon. You don't have square brackets in most cases. You use the dot notation instead. But this is the reality of a huge amount of code that you write as a developer in a production setting. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the new features in Swift. There's something called a tuple. In Objective-C and in C, a method or a function can return a value. In Swift, a method or a function can return multiple values, and they're called tuples. And so, for example, I could have a method in Objective-C that returns a customer name and another method that returns an address. And there's ways to return both of those, you know, return it as a structure or whatever. But essentially, those methods can only return one value. But in Swift, I could write a method that would return the customer name and the address, two separate returns. There are some extremely powerful collection operators, map and join and filter, and I'll show you one example of a map a little later. I won't go into much detail on those. Optionals, we talked about that, and generics are the templates that Liz, can we see the next slide? So let's say in Swift, these are a couple of simple Swift functions, that we wanted a method that we would pass it 2 integers, and it would compare them and return, tell us which one was the largest of the 2. So it's a function that takes 2 integers as parameters and returns an int. If first is greater than or equal to second, return first, and then if it's not, return second. And then now let's say we want to do the same thing, but now this time it's a double instead of an integer. So we'll write another method. And you look at those two, the only difference is the type of the return value and the type of the parameters. So with the generic and Swift, we can combine these two, and we can have one method that, can we go to the next slide, Liz? Thank you. Called maximum value, and it takes a T for template, and we're saying it conforms to the comparable, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Depends on where you grew up, I guess. Which means comparable is it's the protocol. If you conform to that, it means that you will understand greater than, less than, equal, those kind of things. And it takes two parameters, but those are of type T, and it returns a type T. So in other words, as long as that type that you're passing in conforms to the comparable protocol, it'll work. So we don't have to write two methods. And in a simple case like that, that's pretty darn cool. But yeah, and then that next slide, you can see how you can really go crazy with things like this. And I don't even want to try to explain what this line of code does. It's doing a lot of powerful work. So as a developer, you don't want to write. There's a famous saying, and I've forgotten who said it, but debugging is twice as hard as coding. So if you're as clever as you can be while you're coding, what's going to happen when you try to debug something like that? So the point of this little slide, scary-looking slide, is that Swift is deceptively simpler. It's simpler in some cases. It's also got an amazing amount of power that is new and that needs to be learned. So another problem that we encounter working with Swift is that it's a moving target. It's not fully baked. This is a list of the methods that were either removed or added or changed between iOS 8.2 and 8.3, a point release. So what's that? How does that impact your development, especially when you're trying to learn? You've got this extra added complexity. Like, did I do something wrong? Did the language change underneath me? And that's a difficult thing to deal with when you're trying to learn a lot of new concepts. At Bloc, one of our samples is a game called Swiftress. That's a cascading block game written in Swift, and it has been updated 5 times since it was first originally written to deal with the changes that are happening to Swift, and that's a difficult thing to deal with. The other big thing with Swift is, like, what is your goal in learning iOS development? And so let's take a look at the job market. I looked on one of the job aggregator recruiting aggregation sites a couple days ago, and I looked for iOS in any area, and I came back with 3,119 open positions that they knew about, that they were recruiting for iOS. And then I did the same search for Swift, and I came up with a grand total of 35. So there's not a lot of jobs, and it makes sense if you think about it. We're in our 8th year of iPhone. It's gone crazy. The amount of apps that have been written, and the App Store volume. All of those apps are written in Objective. Every iOS app that was ever written up until last June was written in Objective-C. So the working developers that are out there, by and large, are working with Objective-C code, and that's where the market is. That's where the jobs are. You can see, yeah, on this slide, the volume and the way that it's just growing at a tremendous rate, and has surpassed Hollywood U.S. box office revenues, which I think is kind of an interesting comparison there. I'd like to see one more line on the graph that said, the number of people in a movie theater that are using their iPhone. I didn't have that one. So who should learn Swift first? Yeah, this is the meat of the webinar here. If you're a hobbyist, if you take on new languages as for something fun to do and learn a new language, absolutely, Swift is awesome. It's the guy that developed Swift, the lead developer, Chris Latner, is no dummy. I mean, this is pretty amazing stuff in Swift. if you're a bleeding edge enthusiast, you want to be the first, like that guy that says, I want to be 5 years from now, I want to be the person that has 5 years experience already, then Swift is for you. Who should learn Objective-C first? Well, we're pretty clear at Bloc about this. New developers need to start with Objective-C. And experienced developers, if you're already a seasoned developer but you want to move into mobile development, you need to learn Objective-C. And there's a number of reasons for that, you know, and probably the number one reason is that iOS itself is written in Objective-C, and every time you're working with the system, which you are the majority of the time, the majority of the code that you're going to write, you're going to be dealing with Objective-C classes and methods with a slight Swift veneer on them, no semicolon at the end. And then finally, probably the biggest reason that you would want to learn Objective-C first is if you're interested in getting a job. There are a small amount of Swift development positions available right now. Now, if your goal is to be an independent developer and you're going to hit the App Store, one-person team, then you want to learn Swift rather than Objective-C, that would work. But if you're interested in the real world, and if you're interested in being a well-rounded professional iOS developer, whether you want to code in Swift or not, you need to learn Objective-C first. So who should learn both? We think everybody should learn both. That it's pretty clear that Swift is the future. That at some point probably the situation will reverse, and the majority of coding that's done for iOS is going to be done in Swift, not in Objective-C. But that time is a long ways off, and I don't know how far off, but definitely not happening this year. It's definitely not happening next year. But more and more, there are code samples that you see. There's communities that are springing up. It's great to learn, but when you come at it with a solid basis with Objective-C, you'll find that your life writing Swift code is going to go much smoother.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, Steve. That was really great. I'm going to go ahead and unshare my screen so that great, so that we can take some questions from people who are watching. So I've got a question from Marius. Oh, interesting. So she says, Steve, would you recommend writing a watch app in Objective-C or in Swift?
Sure. I would recommend either of those. I think you could do there's not a lot of code actually in a watch app. They don't do a whole lot yet. So yeah, I think that would be a great project if you wanted to dive into Swift. And in fact, one of our projects, our course at Bloc starts with a foundation portion, a foundation phase, and then you move on to the project phase where you build apps, and we have project specifications. Like we don't lead you. You're in charge, and you write this app as a project. And one of them is an app that's in Swift with a watch app to go with it. So that's certainly and I should have said actually I should have pointed out, made more clear that at Bloc in our course, while the foundation is almost completely Objective-C, we do teach the basics of Swift. At the point where you begin the projects, it's your choice whether you want to develop those. Any or all of those could be developed in Swift rather than Objective-C. So if your goal really is to learn Swift and deep dive into Swift, then our course can be as much as about 70% Swift and 30% Objective-C. So,
Steve, I've started reading some of the Swift documentation, and there's a lot of it. Are all of the, or could you choose a mentor with Bloc, or you who has a lot of experience with Swift or has a lot of experience with the documentation?
Absolutely. We try to match students with a mentor that has experience in what they are most interested in. So for example, if maybe your passion lies in game development, we would try to match you with a mentor who has some experience at game development. And none of us are at that 5-year point with Swift, but we do have some mentors that have spent more time with it than others and are more excited about it than others. And so if that was your goal, absolutely we would match you with someone who could really dive into Swift with you.
Very cool. Okay, so I want to remind everyone that we're accepting questions. So we have a few questions from people who have asked before the webinar. So I just want to encourage everyone to use that Q&A app to ask questions. So Liam says, I've been studying a little bit of Objective-C. I'm not an expert yet. Do I need to learn Objective-C before I start learning Swift, or can I get away with starting Swift without having a solid grasp of Objective-C?
We're pretty clear that you need to learn Objective-C first.
Okay.
And that's how our course is designed. And if you've done some development in the past in Objective-C, or that you're going to be able to move through that portion pretty quickly and get on to the more fun stuff if that's what your goal is. But yeah, you absolutely need to learn Objective-C first.
Very cool. Okay, I have a question that I keep seeing some places. So can you tell us what Cocoa is and why it's so important, and if developers use it just with Objective-C or if they use it also with Swift?
Okay, what is Cocoa? Cocoa replaced Carbon on the Mac, and I don't quote me entirely on this, but I think it's the general term for the UI frameworks that are used to develop an OS 10 or an iOS app. And so Cocoa was the environment that you used on the Mac, and then when the iPhone was released, the modifications that were done to that base were called Cocoa Touch.
Okay.
And so that's what that is.
Cool.
But there's no thing in the code called Cocoa Touch that you have to load up or anything.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned, Steve, during the sort of comparison between Objective-C and Swift, that Objective-C has a really strong community. Have you noticed? I know Swift is new. It's been around since June. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you noticed the community and sort of the documentation, Stack Overflow presence of it increasing pretty rapidly over the last year or so?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. There's a lot more content today on Stack Overflow that's Swift related than there was, 3 or 4 months ago. So yeah, it's that community is definitely growing.
Cool. Okay, Julia has a question for us. So from what you showed us, it looks like Swift is easier to write and read even, but she wants to know if the language is easier to learn, I guess. Is it easier to learn Swift than it is to learn Objective-C, or are they about the same?
Well, that's the meme that's out there, right? And in my years of software development, I wouldn't want to go back and try to say how much time have I wasted typing semicolons? That's not a big part of my day. That stuff, when you learn the basics of programming, that syntax, to sit down, an experienced developer, to say I want to learn this new language, the syntax is just not even the tip of the iceberg. It's the top part of the tip of the iceberg. The frameworks that you use are the big hurdle that you need to learn. And so everybody loves the string example. My name is plus Steve Schauer, because that is so much simpler. That one's the best. But again, the reality is that Swift has got a lot of complexities that go beyond, that don't exist in Objective-C. At the same time, the basic syntax is simpler. In some cases, like in particular that one string example, way simpler. In most examples, it's a little simpler. But I don't buy into the idea myself that Swift is simpler to learn than Objective-C.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. From the examples that you showed, it looked like in the simpler ones you could see a real difference, but when getting a little bit more complex, like I guess like any language.
And honestly, your day writing code, you're not gonna sweat over how many semicolons and brackets you had to type. That's not the hard part.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. So so you showed us that cool GIF of how much Swift has evolved just since June. How often does Bloc update like the Swift curriculum and the Objective-C curriculum, I guess, to a certain extent as well? You said that like one of the projects had sort of evolved as changes had been made. Are there? I mean, how often are y'all iterating on the curriculum?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've got a curriculum team that's what they do full time, is to work on our curriculum. In addition to iOS, we've got some other areas that we cover, and so that's something that we have to keep up on always. We're rolling around to another WWDC in June. The invites just went out last week, and or was it the beginning of this week? I don't remember. So inevitably there'll be some more big changes. Maybe not as big as last year. Last year was just like a bombshell. It was crazy, and so yeah, absolutely. Our job is we've got to keep our Swift sample code up to date with the new releases, and we've got to move with the new operating system releases and the new features. This last year we got extensions, we got WatchKit. Recently we got, in addition to Swift, continuity. I mean, there was a huge amount of changes in iOS 8, and so we probably won't see as big a release this year, but who knows? It might be. And yeah, absolutely, our job is to keep up on that stuff.
Very cool. Awesome. Okay, so if somebody wants to start learning to program for iOS in general, I think we have learned that they should be learning both Objective-C and Swift. But if that's someone's goal, what's the next step? Do they run out and sign up for Bloc? Should they like go to a meetup first? What do you suggest?
I think if you're absolutely brand new to programming, then at Bloc we point you at some pre-work that you can do, some resources that you can go through to prepare yourself to get a good running start. And you can go to our website at bloc.io and find that information for iOS. And yeah, meetups are a great resource. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of ways that you can dip your toe in. But we do all the time accept new apprentices that have absolutely no programming experience, and they complete our course, and we've got success stories to show that it works. They get jobs.
Very cool. Yeah, I just got to talk with one of y'all's graduates, Curvins. He's super impressive. I love talking with him. He's working at Hearst now. He's like totally crushing. So I believe it.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Aaron who says, so if you are saying that Swift is actually using a lot of Objective-C or looks like Objective-C in a lot of ways, then wouldn't being a Swift developer still make someone relevant as an iOS developer for a job? What do you think? Do you think they're actually that similar, or maybe they just look similar? Or?
They're pretty similar, but the point I was trying to make is, the reason that sample looked similar is because that sample code in Swift was calling into Objective-C frameworks, and so they have the same names and the same parameters, whether you're writing them in Objective-C or Swift. But if you get a job on a team that has an existing iOS application, they're not going to say, well, why don't you go ahead and just write your part in Swift. Their existing code is all in Objective-C, and maybe they'll make a decision at one point or another to develop a new feature in Swift, or a complete rewrite. Generally, it takes a long time for something like that to happen. They've got to think of the the return on investment. Like, am I going to sell more of copies of this application if it was written in Swift? Would Swift give me abilities that I don't get in Objective-C? And I think that's a tough decision, and most companies would probably say, I think we already bought that code, but let's just maintain that for a while longer and see how it goes.
Totally, I think that answer makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, I think that those are all the questions that we have from the audience, unless somebody wants to slip one in quickly before we wrap up. Okay, I think we're good. So, Steve, do you have anything else that you want to share with us about your teaching approach at Bloc? Any last parting words?
Well, thanks for doing this, Liz. This has been fun, and I think it's been I hope it's been informative. I love Bloc. I'm having just the best time working there, and I love teaching the craft of development, which is our philosophy at Bloc. We're all about craftsmanship, practical instruction from experienced professionals that have been in the business, and for the most part, the apprentices that come in to Bloc, their goal is to be employed as a developer, and so that's our mission, and that's a pretty fun thing to do. So we don't teach theory. We do teach theory. I shouldn't say that, but in addition, we teach craftsmanship.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, Steve, we cannot thank you enough for being here. We really appreciate it. I've learned so much about the similarities, differences between Objective-C and Swift, and I hope that everybody who's tuned in has as well. I think it's pretty clear that you're an awesome teacher also, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of our course report viewers wanted you for their next mentor at Bloc. So I think what we've learned from this webinar is if you're trying to decide between Objective-C and Swift, the answer is to learn Objective-C if you want a job today, and make sure that you tack on Swift if you want a job in the future. And you can learn both at Bloc, obviously. So thanks to everybody who also tuned in and asked questions. We really appreciate it. Remember that you can use the course report code in the referral section of your Bloc application to get $200 off tuition, because we want you to take that first step into learning web and mobile development. And of course, sign up for the course report newsletter on coursereport.com. You can get alerts about our next webinar, and let us know what you want to, what topics you want to see our next webinars on, and we're happy to host them. So thank you so much, Steve. Thanks everyone for joining in, and we will see you next time.